In this episode, we're going to be handling databases. One thing about Laravel that you need to know is the fact that you can actually use any database that you would like, and they are interchangeable. That's because we actually use a layer of Laravel called Eloquent. Eloquent is a database layer, and what it does is it actually encapsulates all of the different services and make them all have the same API, which means that we can develop in one particular database, for example, MySQL, and then we can deploy on our actual servers in a completely different database. For example, we could even use Amazon AWS at that point. But our code doesn't change. In development, most of the time, I actually use SQLite. It's actually a flat file database. I'll show you how to set one up in this episode. It's very simple to do, but you may use MySQL. So again, you don't have to change any of your code. It just works. And it's one of the beauties of using a framework like Laravel. So let's start with MySQL, definitely one of the most popular options. Now, MySQL for Windows, if you need to install it, you can simply do a quick search for MySQL for Windows, and you can go to the Downloads panel right here. And at the time of the recording, the current version is 8.017. You can download the appropriate file for your system, and you can also download 5.7. Now, 5.7 has been around for a long time, and it is in most servers today. I don't think most servers have upgraded to 8. And if you want to keep your local development the same as your production server, I would recommend you actually install 5.7. So either one would work. Now, if you are on the Mac, then we can bring that in through Homebrew. If you haven't installed Homebrew in your Mac just yet, you simply copy this command into the terminal. Now, once you've got it installed, you basically get access to the MySQL command. So if you typed in MySQL, in my case, it actually says access denied because it doesn't seem to find a user. Typically, you'll do something like MySQL-u, and then the user is root. And that does give you access to MySQL. Once you are inside this command, it's very simple to do. You will simply create a new database, and let's just give it a name of Laravel, and with a semicolon, and now that's it. We've got a database set up in our system. Very simple to do. Now, if you are over in the Mac, I do recommend you download SQL Pro. It's 100% free, and it's a nice way for you to do this as a GUI. Let me pull that open right now, and here it is. So if I connect to my local host, again, localhost is just root, and typically the password is not set. Again, this is all based on your system, so you may need to figure out how to get this working in your system. Opening up localhost, if I take a look at my available databases, we see that I have this new Laravel database, and this is the one that we just created. So that's it. We've got the setup done. So let's jump back into PHP Storm. And now let's visit a brand new file that we haven't talked about. And that is the environment file. The environment file is in charge of setting up the application in its current environment. And what that means is that your application is going to use slightly different services in production as it would in your local development. One perfect example of that is the actual database layer that we are using. In our case right now, we're using MySQL, but as I mentioned before, you could use any number of services. That file sits right at the root of your project, and it is called .env. If we pop open .env, we see this section right here with db_. These are all of your database settings. Right now, it is set up to MySQL, and it is set up to 127.0.0.1. That is localhost. Right now, our database is set up to Laravel, and the username is set to root. So when I created that Laravel database in my local environment, I kind of already knew that the settings were going to be like this by default. Now, if you created a database and called it something else, in that case, that would change here. And if you do have a password, go ahead and add it right here. Now, one tip here you may need is if your password has special characters or spaces or something like that, you can always add it inside quotes, and then you can type in whatever you want at that point. So keep that in mind whenever you're setting up your database. All right, so now that we've done all of this setup, it's time for us to talk about what we actually want to handle in this episode. If we take a look at the actual services page that we currently have, we've got 2 services, but again, as a quick review, if you check out the hello controller, it's just coming from this array right here that we created. What I actually want to do is create a database, and I want to pull our services from the database. So by the end of this episode, we'll have that tackled. There's a couple of more things that we need to talk about, and that is models. Now, if you remember, Laravel is an MVC framework, and the M stands for models. Models are just a representation of your database tables. Now, a single model, a single instance of a model represents a single row in your database, and the models as a whole is the entire table. So if that is true, then that means that we need a services model because we're trying to fetch services, and our table name is going to match that. Pay close attention to the naming convention because if you do, Laravel will take care of a lot of stuff for you behind the scenes. If you decide to name things against the convention of Laravel, be warned that you're going to have to do a little bit more work than necessary. I strongly recommend that as you're starting out, you always follow the naming convention. The naming convention for Laravel is as follows. Your model is going to be the singular version of the word. In our case, it would be service, right? It is singular, not services. Then your table is actually going to be plural. So in that case, our table name is going to be services with an S at the end. Now notice that this is uppercase and this is lowercase. So we're going to need a service model and we're going to need a service table. Now to create a table, typically you would actually probably go into SQL Pro or some other MySQL program and actually generate the table. But there's a very important concept to understand here, and it is the concept of migrations. Don't get overwhelmed by migrations. Migrations are just a simple file that describes how the table should be created in the database. As opposed to you doing it manually, we're actually writing a small script that generates the table. This makes it very easy for anyone to add the exact same table to their project, and very easy for you to deploy a project to production and create this database on the fly. Now we're going to use a couple of different PHP Artisan commands. So let's jump back in the terminal. Let me actually exit out of this MySQL. Let's clear out the screen and let's bring up PHP Artisan. Let's check out the make section. Remember, we already touched up on make controller. Now I'm interested in a model and I'm interested in a migration. And of course, we do have a make model and we have a make migration. Let's start with the model. If you remember from the previous episode, you can always run PHP Artisan help and then the command name. So we'll say make model. This will give you the manual for this particular command with all of its usages, options, and any other important information. The only thing that we are interested in is the name. So let's go ahead and run that command. PHP Artisan make model. And remember from the naming convention, the service is going to be capital S service, and it's going to be singular. So we'll go ahead and create that model. And then we do need a migration. So let's do the same thing again. So we'll say PHP Artisan help make migration. And check this out. We now have a name, but we can also go ahead and pass in this create flag. This is the one that I'm interested in because, of course, we are creating a table. So let's go ahead and run that command. We'll say PHP Artisan make migration. And what do we call this? Let's go ahead and say creates services table. And notice the underscores. So we'll say something like creates, then the table name, and then just table. Then we do need to pass in this -- create, and then we need to set that equal to the table that we're going to be creating. So -- create, and then let's go ahead and name our table services. Remember, naming convention is very important. The table is all of your services, but the model is one service. It's one row in your table. That's why your model is singular and your table is actually plural. We'll go ahead and run that command and we are good to go. So what we just did was we generated two files in our project. Let's take a look. I'm going to close everything up so you can see exactly where they are. Right inside your app directory, we now have a service.php file. This is your model. And if we open this up, check this out. We've got a class with the name of service and it extends model. That's how you know that this is a model. And remember that keyword I told you about that you've probably forgot the name of already? That is eloquent. Notice how model, it's a database eloquent model. Remember, eloquent is that layer, that database layer inside of Laravel that is extremely powerful. You're going to learn to love eloquent. The other file that we created is going to be inside our database directory, inside migrations. Again, remember, the migrations are just a script that generates a table. Think of it as the exact same steps that you've taken yourself manually to create a table inside a MySQL database, but now we're doing it through scripts and we're doing it through code. That way we could put it in source control and it could be replicated very easily. Now notice down here, there are a couple of other migrations already in this project. We'll go ahead and ignore those. Those actually come with Laravel. We'll touch up on what they are in a later episode. But notice the last one down here, creates services table. Great, let's open this up. So check this out. This class has two methods, an up method and it's got a down method. One thing to know about migrations is that they run forwards and back. So when you run them forwards, meaning up, you perform a specific action. And then if you run them backwards, that would be the down method, you do the opposite. So in this case, we are creating a database in our up method, and in our down method, we are actually dropping it. We are removing it. So we are doing the opposite of what it does. It undoes the command. Now, one thing in Laravel is down methods are not required. So you can ignore them altogether. So how do we generate this table? Let's get right to it. The first thing we'll notice here is that, yes, we are creating a table by the name of services, and we've got an incremental ID column for us already, as well as timestamps. And this is all great news. However, for our example of services, we're going to need some place to put the actual service name. So let's create another one of those here, and we'll say a new column inside my table. It needs to be a string. Let's go ahead and save a string for name. And that's going to pertain to my service name. Okay, so far so good. We need to run one more command because we actually need to run this file. This file doesn't exist yet. Let me jump back to SQL Pro. Notice that there are no tables right here. Even if I refresh, there are no tables inside my database. My database doesn't know about any of these migrations. There is a command for that. So let's run PHP Artisan one more time. And let's check out migrate. So there's a whole migrate section. And if you run PHP Artisan migrate, let's actually run the help command first. We'll say PHP Artisan help migrate. This is what runs the database migrations. That sounds like exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and run that command. PHP Artisan migrate. And now we get a list of tables. Like I said, there are some migrations in there that we actually didn't create. We're really only interested in this creates services table. Let's go back to the GUI and let me open this up. If I refresh, notice now we've got these tables. Also notice that I have this services right here. That's the table that we just created. And as a matter of fact, it also has that name. The ID and the created at and updated at, those came from the timestamps that we had right here in our migration. So the timestamps are right here and the big increment is right here. Now, the reason why Laravel includes this is because you're going to want to have unique IDs for all of your entries, and it's always great to have timestamps whenever a record is created or updated. And that's these two rows right here. Laravel creates those for us out of the box because it's such a common thing, and that's why they're there. Now, let's go ahead and add some services here. Let's say cool service 1. And then let's go ahead and say now for those two, and let's create another service. And we'll also go ahead and initialize those. All right, so we've got some stuff inside of our database. Now I want to actually display it right here. Notice how I've got these two services. Again, just as a quick refresher, those are being hard-coded in from my hello controller. That is certainly not what I want to do. How do we fetch something? Well, we use the model, this one right here, this services model. So let's go ahead and replace this, and I want to fetch them from my database. I want these two right here. All right, let's check this out. Let's go back to PHP Storm, and then let's go ahead and create a new variable here, and we'll say services equals, and then we need to actually do the full namespace, so we'll say app service, and then we can simply grab all of them. Give me all of my services. And now one cool trick we could do here is we can use a function called dd. It's very useful. What it does is it just outputs out whatever you pass in here, and it stops all operations. So let's go ahead and die and dump the services. And now when we visit the browser and I hit refresh, it actually says this site can't be reached. That's because I'm not running PHP Artisan Serve. PHP Artisan Serve. There we go. I had turned it off to create the SQL database. And if I hit refresh, there we go. So notice we get back an array and it's got 2 services in it. And if we keep opening this up inside the attributes section, this first one is called Cool Service 1. And then on this second one, if we open up attributes again, we have another service. So just like that, we actually pulled from our database. Now what I need to do is change up the code. My services are no longer going to be hard-coded, so I can delete those lines. I can delete this die and dump as well. And now we are passing in services, the same string as well, but now we're grabbing them using our model. The way that these actually work is that they are objects. So I will no longer be able to just simply grab services. One trick I can show you here is, why don't we actually just check out one of these services so we can see what we're getting back. We could do the same thing here with the die and dump as well, but this time let's go ahead and die and dump just a single service. Remember, we are inside a for each loop, so this will actually die and dump after the very first service. Let's check that out on the browser. Hit refresh, and sure enough, I get a single service. Notice that this is not a collection or an array, it's just a single service. And if I want the name, then I can use simple object notation. So I can say service, arrow, name, and now I get cool service, exactly what I need. Great, let me delete that line, and instead of just service, I need to do service, arrow, name. Hit refresh, and sure enough, we are grabbing it from the database. Let's add a third one here, just for example. We'll say example Laravel. Let's put my timestamps again. And if I hit refresh, boom, there we go. How cool is that? Very, very easy to do, very cool. Now, one last thing, stick with me for a couple of more minutes. I want to show you how to set up a completely different database, and that is SQLite. Let's jump back into my code, and all we would need to do here is actually create a blank file inside this database directory. So I will create a new file here, and let's call it database.sqlite. And if you do that, now this is just going to be a simple text file, completely blank. And again, notice the path. It is inside the databases directory, and then it's called database.sqlite. So now let's use a completely different database service just to prove how easy it is to change that. So in my .env file, instead of MySQL, let's use SQLite. And then I will erase all of the other lines. SQLite is a very fast and easy to do database because it's a file. By us simply creating this file right here, we have a full-blown database. Let's jump back into the terminal. I will stop my PHP Artisan Serve, but this is a completely fresh database. So we actually need to migrate it because remember, it's completely blank right now. So we'll say PHP Artisan migrate, and sure enough, it created all of these tables for us. But now, if we jump back into here and hit refresh, whoops, let me run that command again. PHP Artisan Serve. There we go. Let's try that again. No services available. So just like that, we changed from one database service, which was MySQL, to another one, which was SQLite. It's just that simple. Now, if you wanted to add, I'm going to show you a cool trick. We're not quite ready to talk about Tinker, but let me show you a pretty cool tool that ships with Laravel, and it is Tinker. So we'll say PHP Artisan Tinker. And this allows you to interact with your application through the command line. It's pretty cool. So we'll say service equals, so let's create a new record in that database. We could do that using the model. So we'll say new app service, and now we have an instance of service. So I can simply set the service name equal to hello from SQLite, and then let's go ahead and save that service. So we'll say service arrow save. Okay, so now let me go ahead and serve my application one more time. I'll hit refresh, and there we go. So hello from SQLite. You want to change the database again? No problem. Let's go ahead and change it back to MySQL. And just like that, now we are running under MySQL. So that is the crash course on models, migrations, and everything to do with MySQL and SQLite. Now, there are many different database services that you can use with Laravel. So just as a very last thing, we can actually take a look at what services are available for us. If we take a look inside the config file, this is this directory right here with config, and then there's a database.php. And if you scroll down a little bit, we'll notice here that we have some different connections. So we used the SQLite connection and we used the MySQL connection. But also notice that we have a PG SQL. We also have SQL Server, and there's many other ones. As a matter of fact, you can even create your own driver. So keep that in mind. That's going to wrap it up for our episode today. Go ahead and create some tables in your project and play around with migrations and models and get comfortable with that. And when you're ready, let's move on to the next episode.